Hi, I'm Jolene Grace, murder mystery novelist. I'd love to share with you my debut novel, Going Dark, a thriller so exciting other readers call fantastic and must read. Head to my website, jolenegracebooks.com to get a copy. And as a bonus, I'm giving away my short story, Stranger in the Night, for free. Hello everyone, you're listening to The Crime Room, a true crime podcast about how homicide detectives catch bad guys.
Because the road from innocent to guilty is never a straightforward line. The reality is that some bad people are really good at telling lies, and that some good people are really bad at telling the truth.
I'm Jolene Grace, a murder mystery novelist and your co-host.
And I'm Brandon, a law enforcement supervisor with over 10 years of police experience.
Let's talk crime.
Let's talk crime.
The saga of Alec Murdaugh comes to a twisted conclusion. The once prominent South Carolina lawyer found guilty on 2 counts of murder. All that and more on today's episode, Interrogating Alec Murdaugh.
If you have been following the Alec Murdaugh case and you've tried to make sense of the crime scene, the confusing statements he gave to the police in 3 different interviews, then listen on. With Interrogating Alec, we aim to explain the evidence, examine Alex's answers in those interrogations, from the point of view of a law enforcement officer. Why they ask him some questions, but waited to ask other questions that may have seemed obvious to you, as well as behavioral science detectives were picking up when Alec Murdaugh was talking, and much more.
Well, he did it.
Yes, he did.
The husband, the father, the respected lawyer, and all that. Alec Murdaugh found guilty on 2 counts of murder for shooting Paul, his younger son, he has 2, and Maggie, his wife of 30 plus years. He had us fooled at first. On that 911 call, he had me fooled for sure. He cried, called out to Maggie and Paul, acted distraught. Let's take a listen.
Hampton 911, what's your emergency?
This is Alec Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to answer immediately. My wife and child just got badly.
Okay, you said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Stay on the line with me, okay?
Hurry.
Yes, sir. Stay on the line with me, okay?
Yes. Hello?
I'm still here. Stay on the line. I'm still here, okay?
Colony County Communications.
Collison, I have an Alex Murdaugh on the line calling from 4147 Moselle Road. He's advising that his wife and child was shot.
Okay, and sir, give me the address again.
It's 4147 Moselle Road. I've been up to it now. It's bad.
Okay, how did they shoot? Did they shoot themselves?
Oh, no. Hell no.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Are they in a vehicle?
No, ma'am. They're on the ground out at my kennel.
Okay, and did you see anyone?
He shot in the head, and he shot really bad. He shot
Okay, where is he shot at?
Ma'am, I don't know, but there's blood everywhere. I can see his brain. Face down. I tried to turn her a little bit, but she's got a hole in her head.
Okay, is he breathing at all?
No, nobody.
Is she? Okay, do you see anything? Do you see anyone in the area?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. No.
Is there any guns near them at all?
No. There's here.
What color is your house on the outside?
If that's what you're asking, they didn't shoot themselves, ma'am.
What color is your house on the outside?
It's white. You can't see it from the road.
Okay, is it a house or a mobile home?
It's a house.
Okay, and what is your name?
My name is Alex Murdaugh.
Okay, did you hear anything, or did you come home and find them?
No, man, I've been gone. I just came back.
Okay, and was anyone else supposed to be at your house?
No, ma'am.
He sounds so convincing, man. After all, he has a little experience calling the South Carolina Emergency Dispatch Services. Hello, Gloria Satterfield comes to mind for those who've been paying attention.
She was the family housekeeper who tripped and fell and hit her head and died 3 weeks later, all under suspicious circumstances.
Awful.
We have a podcast on Gloria.
Yes, we do.
You can find her at thecrimeroom.com, and you can hear her story. And if you like our show, subscribe, like, and leave us a comment. It helps us grow and build a community dedicated to true crime fans. So just going back to that 911 tape, just something that really hit at home. Just as a husband and father, hearing the way the dispatcher said, "I don't want you to touch them in case there's any evidence," just makes it feel so real and unnatural. If this wasn't Alec Murdaugh, and it truly was someone who came in and killed their family, they wouldn't want to stop hugging them or holding them, because that means it's time to let them go. As soon as she said, "Do not touch them," it was like telling him it's time to let go. Their souls aren't there anymore. It's done. And this is nothing against the dispatcher, as she is thinking as a partner to law enforcement. So she's thinking of the case, doing her job.
You know, you're the one who first of the two of us picked up on what the dispatcher was saying. Don't touch them. And the whole time I was thinking, why isn't he touching them?
Right.
Why shouldn't he touch them, you know? So, you know, good point there. Going back to that night on June 7, 2021, the first officer shows up on scene. He's familiar with the Murdaugh family. Everybody in that neck of the woods know them. He has clout around those parts, South Carolina in general. Alec was a fourth-generation lawyer, and the family law firm has been around for what, over a century? So the officer perhaps is exercising some discretion in how he handles Alec Murdaugh. What do you think? How should officers approach somebody who has an elevated status in society? And I hate to say, you know, we're different statuses in society, but that's how society is built. So how should an officer approach somebody like that?
So the first thing you do is you handle the scene and exigency of the scene immediately, no matter who it is. So when you don't have time to think, you go to the scene, you handle it, you provide medical care, you do a protective sweep, you make sure no one else is there. And after you set a perimeter, that's when you take a step back. That's when you think to yourself, it's time to call somebody who's not connected to this person, somebody who has no history. And that's what they did. They called SLED.
Who's removed from that person.
Yes, who's removed from the county or the town.
They can be more objective, or at least they can say that they're objective.
Right, and they will always have a small part, but their goal is to be as far away as possible to a point where they provide support and assistance to this new unit coming in. However, they're not part of the decision making.
Okay, so you secure the scene, but what do you actually do with the person? Do you put them in handcuffs? Do you put them in the back of a car? How do you handle them?
Well, it depends on the situation. If you have to handcuff them and put them in the back of the car, that's what you do.
You would do that.
Yes, you take it to where you can. In an instant like this, where you need to develop probable cause and a lot of probable cause, it is better off to wait before you handcuff anybody. So what these officers did, and they took their time, talked to Alec, and took a step back, is probably something they should have done.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes case by case, but in this instance, I believe they did the correct thing.
They handled him correctly.
Yes.
So what we're seeing from the body cam is a man who is an emotional wreck. We have no reason to doubt him at this point. The story of the double homicide gets picked up by the local stations and then snowballs into a national headline. Overnight, the murders explode. But the rest of us still don't know anything about him. Alec Murdaugh is the him I'm talking about. He's still a victim in our eyes. The unthinkable, the unimaginable has happened to him. And while the rest of us are wondering, who might have killed Maggie and Paul? What's the motive? Local law enforcement is one step ahead of us. And the clues are in the crime scene, the dog kennels, and the first interview Alec Murdaugh gives SLED, which is the law enforcement authority in South Carolina. First, give us a brief overview of SLED so we know who the major players are and who will ultimately lift the mask of Alex Murdaugh, the victim, and reveal Alec Murdaugh, the killer.
Well, that's an excellent way of putting it. So, SLED is a state law enforcement division for South Carolina, which was founded in 1935. It was founded for the purpose of enforcing state liquor laws, assist other departments in detecting crime, and to enforce criminal law. Essentially, their purpose is to provide all counties, towns, and cities within South Carolina with the manpower, technology, and expertise to properly investigate and process crimes. So in the case of Alec, David Owen became the lead investigator for SLED. However, a case like this will always be a team effort. There's just no way one person can do it alone.
As the highest ranking officer, what will be the first thing that you do? What's the single most important step that you will have to do in a crime scene like that?
Here are the steps that I would take when I arrived on scene. So initially, you have to deal with safety of yourself and those who are around you. So in this case, the responding officers and Alec who were there.
Well, Alec got you covered with that. He went in to get that gun.
Yeah, he left it to the side though, yeah.
So you said safety.
Yeah, so hopefully you would have another officer with you to stay with Alec, but once you're there, you have to deal with the safety of the scene. So you'd have to walk around, look around, see if there's anybody around before you provide medical aid, because unfortunately, if you're in a compromising position, you won't be able to provide the necessary medical care.
I mean, it's the same way when you fly, you have to put the oxygen mask first on yourself before you put it on your kid.
Right.
And it's awful to think about it, but if you're hurt, if somebody ambushes you, there's no way you can help the injured or you can investigate the crime.
Right. Absolutely.
It could be a trap. So yeah, it makes sense that you will be for safety.
And one of the big issues is that when you are worrying about your safety, walking around looking for other suspects, you sometimes, unfortunately, may destroy some evidence. So you may walk over a track or a footprint or grab or touch something that you probably shouldn't have, but you had to.
So at this point, you're not so worried about preserving evidence. It's safety. Safety. Like a big exclamation point over your head. Protect myself, secure the scene, then deal with anything else that comes.
Right. So I mostly protect yourself and then right to medical aid right after. I know in the 911 tapes, he said that they were dead, but you have to go check for yourself because you can't trust that he knows what he's doing for one or is trained in life-saving tactics. When they do CPR and other sorts of life-saving tactics on scene, usually they do it for a good 20 plus minutes, depending on if they have any signs of life. So if it happened relatively soon to when he called and when they responded, then there still may be a chance. While you're there, you also see if there's any other fresh tracks or tire marks or anything alluding to where the suspects went. If you see footprints, let's say it's muddy out and you see footprints running into the woods, you immediately either head that way or call for other support and direct them that way.
So let's just recap. First is safety, then is medical aid, and then now the third step would be now you're beginning to look at the crime scene, to look for points of entry, points of exit. Correct?
Yeah, so it's initially more of just like a quickly. You get on scene, you look around, you see something obvious. This door right here smashed open, you see something leading that way, you head that way. And realistically, if there's 3 or more officers, those 3 can be handled by each individual. You can have one doing safety, or 2 of them, or 3 at first, then one maneuvers to medical, and the last one takes over the pursuit. And those are the 3 main ones. But then after that, what you should do is a protective sweep, and you create a perimeter. And the key about a perimeter is you can always go smaller, but you can never go wider.
Say that one more time for our listeners, because that's important. That is very important.
It is very important. You can always go smaller, but you can never go wider.
And in this case, you have what, 1,700 acres?
Yes, a lot of property to go through.
But realistically, you're not going to search the entire property in this particular moment.
No, it'd be almost impossible. You need a teams upon teams and days to do that. And you would probably need sunlight as well because it was dark out.
Yeah,
so you'd have to wait. But in this case, you would back everybody up. The perimeter would probably be at least 100 yards from the kennels on each way, maybe even more. And don't let anybody in, because once somebody comes in, they may destroy evidence.
Do you bring a logbook with you to do visitors and whatnot?
So once you create the perimeter, you have an officer, you assign them to log everybody who enters and exits, what time, when, and then you can even put their purpose, because in this instance, there will be a lot of people going.
Yeah.
A lot of people showing up. And it's hard to keep track mentally, so you'll have a log and somebody who is dedicated to the log. And what that also means is that there's only one point of ingress and egress. You can't leave the crime scene anywhere but this area. You can't enter anywhere but this area.
So explain to those like me whose only law enforcement experience is by watching crime shows, how realistic it is that you will put booties on.
Very realistic.
Okay, so they nail that.
Not nearly as quick as they do, but if you're going near the crime scene, you're like really close, you're going to be putting on booties.
Okay.
But it depends on who you are, because many people won't have the skills or training or the job title to go to the body after you've done your initial, determine them that they're deceased. So you won't be going near them. The crime level show up, you may have
So not everybody wears booties.
No, not everybody. If you're in the crime scene and you're not close, you're not going to be wearing booties. No, if you're at the perimeter.
I wanted everybody with blue or white booties on their feet. As law enforcement goes about working the scene, some wearing booties, some don't, as you pointed out, the weather stops to cooperate and it begins to rain. I don't think us who don't work in law enforcement, as I've pointed out, think it's necessary how the weather affects your job or the ability to do your job. We don't think about that. You know, we want on the body, the cool science stuff maybe, but the weather is not something that you sit there and like,
right.
The weather, what would happen? But the weather can actually have a huge impact in a crime scene that is outside.
Absolutely.
Because once piece of evidence is gone, it's gone. You can recreate it again.
Right. Going back to my previous statement of fresh and continuous pursuit, you pretty much, if it's muddy outside or there's snow, you can have footprints leaving. You can have tire tracks. You can have blood inside the mud showing the direction of someone's gone. And snow, rain can all destroy that, right? So if it starts becoming a problem, you have to deal with it immediately. And sometimes it's a daunting task and you won't be able to save everything.
So let's stay with weather for a little bit, because I find it so fascinating that, you know, some wind and sled and rain can impact how you investigate.
Right.
What type of season is the hardest when it relates to a homicide that's been done outside?
Outside, it would have to be rain.
Rain?
Anything with rain, because snow stays frozen. It doesn't really move too much. Even if it's warm out, it's slower. If it's raining, pouring out, every droplet's going to be washed away. The body is just going to have all sorts of liquid just moving around. You won't be able to see very much. Everything will be soaked. For a homicide, unless, of course, it happened in the past and the body was found within the snow, that may be difficult as well. But a fresh murder, I believe rain would be the harshest. Yeah, and some of the ways in which investigators will actually save the evidence to the best that they can is, first, they will get videos and pictures of everything. Nowadays, you can actually take pictures of a dusted fingerprint and send it to the lab, and they can come back with a match. It's very impressive.
That is very impressive.
In fact, sometimes or most times they'll send that first. They'll get a match before they even give the latent print to the lab, and they'll have the information right there.
You know, I think it's so cute how geeked out here right now. If people could see your face lit up when you told me we can take a photo of a fingerprint and send it to, you know, a lab maybe 20, 30, 40 miles away. And they were like, we don't have to come out in the rain. We will give you the answer right now.
It's not typically that fast, but they could if they really had to.
All CSI
All
all day.
The second option is tarps, because you really don't want to move any evidence. But if you have to, or you could put a tarp over that prevents the rain. That's more of like a light rain without a lot of wind. And you have to prioritize the evidence that may disappear first. So if you have a trail of blood that's in the open, but the body is found inside a house, you go right outside and you address the outside blood droplets first so it doesn't disappear. And worst comes to worst, you may have to move the evidence, take a quick photograph, and just move it.
To preserve it.
To preserve as much as you can, yes.
And you place markers, right?
Yes.
Where the evidence are?
Yeah.
Now, another law enforcement trivia question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide which is number 1, number 2, and number 3? I am fascinated by the little tabs that they put on. And by the way, they're not as high tech as you see in the show. Sometimes it could be, you know, just a stick if you don't have the tabs with you, you know.
A murder such as this one, I promise you there were other things used other than markers, because there would be a lot of evidence.
A lot of evidence.
So to answer your original question, you take a starting point, you start from there.
Any starting point?
Typically at the beginning of the crime scene. So
what would be considered beginning? A beginning where you parked your car, would that be considered beginning, or the beginning where the bodies are?
Either or, it depends on how you typically do it. But if you arrive to a scene and you start seeing bullet shells or casings at one spot, you may start there. After you've done everything, you may start there, say, hey, this is the starting point, and just fan out from there.
Or what if SLED shows up and they don't like the way
You wouldn't have started before SLED. You can start identifying stuff, but they will come and they will make their own markers and identify the pattern that they want to use to determine.
Okay, so nobody's stepping on anybody's toes.
No, it's kind of unrelated, but it's not. So every time you enter into a house and do like a search warrant or any sort of protective sweep, you always want to do the same thing every time. So you want to either start from the top or the bottom. When you enter, you either take a right or you take a left, and you just go with the flow that you do every single time, so that when you're on the stand or when you go back to remember, you know exactly what you did because that's what you did. Or if you don't remember, you can say, hey, I don't really remember, but I always do this, 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 and this. So that's probably what I did.
Explain that to you, supervisor. I don't remember. Well, at some point, SLED arrives on scene and Alec is pulled into a car to be interviewed. He appears beside himself, crying, very upset. When he cries, you see 2 hands from the back of the seat reach over and hold his arm. It's a hard thing to watch. But let's go deeper, remove the emotions, and figure out the meaning behind his statements. Side note, before we go in, people communicate differently and have different cultures. And so when you're interviewing someone, a suspect, what are the top 4 initial signs you search for?
As you mentioned, culture plays a huge part. Not everybody is the same in personalities. So not every clue or indicator means that they're lying or that they are guilty, but there are a couple of them that really combined indicate guilt. So first is avoiding questions, especially when they're simple and recent. Like, where were you? Who were you with? I get this one all the time. Hey, who were you with? Oh, I was at Doughboy's house. Who's Doughboy? Oh, I don't know. You don't know his name? How long have you known him? I met him yesterday. Or I met him today and we just started hanging out. And now you're at his house. You don't know his name. All right, what does he look like? Oh, I don't know what he looks like. I barely know the guy. Stuff to that effect really indicates it. The next one is giving vague answers. So you ask them a question, how long were you over at the park for? I don't know, 15 to 3 hours. when you realistically, that's not a time. You would know whether it's closer to 15 or closer to 3 hours. The next one is actually a huge one, and it really sticks out if you pay attention to it. And Alec does it in his interviews. He does it a lot. He talks about things that don't matter.
So it appears that he talks a lot because he talks a lot. It's a flood that comes out of his mouth. He seems so cooperative.
Yes, he'll talk about things that do not matter. He knows cannot lead back to anything in the case, and it appears that he's being cooperative. However, we get that all the time. We know what's going on. He'll just keep talking about something that really doesn't matter. And the detective did a great job because you still want them to keep talking because they may slip up and say something they shouldn't have, but they know what he's doing. And then lastly, their alibi, just there's no witnesses. They were either alone or in Alex Murdaugh's case, he was napping. So something where your alibi has no person to back it up, no proof. You're either napping or you were walking or you're hanging out watching TV for 5 hours.
Well, Alex Murdaugh does a lot. I mean, he hits pretty much anything that you said. We can just yep, he did that.
He hits everyone.
He did that. He hits everyone. I particularly want to point out the one thing that stuck out to me is how he had an answer for every question. It sounded like a legitimate answer. But as you said, it led to nowhere.
Right.
You could never check him. There was never a paper trail or electronic trail. It was always an answer leading to nowhere.
Right, leading to nowhere. I like the way you phrase that.
So what's up with his story? I mean, where did he go? What did he do? And how did he discover the bodies?
So we'll start from the first tape. We'll call it an interview at this time because that's what it was. It wasn't quite an interrogation. Although his times and story kind of changed between each interview, we'll go over what he said in the first one. This is the same night after the incident. So he left work to meet Paul at home to deal with sunflowers that they arranged to plant for the next day. He said that they got there pretty early before Maggie arrived, and they rode around for about 45 to an hour. And they really didn't do anything. They just kind of rode around, looking around.
Some practice shooting.
Around. Yeah, I think he mentions the shooting in the second interview. But yeah, they just mess around. They go target practicing. They get back home. Maggie got there, and they ate dinner. While they were home, he took about a 25 to 30-minute nap on the couch.
He wasn't sure how long.
Yeah, and again, this is a nap. This is something where
there's apparently no clocks or watches in that house. He had no idea what time it is.
And so when he wakes up, Paul and Maggie's gone. According to him, he assumed Maggie went to the kennel because she was a dog lover. He didn't know where Paul went, but believed the kennel as well because of when he arrived at the kennel, he was there as well. So when he woke up, he texted her and he called her right after his nap with no response, which I actually believe the nap time when he was napping was the time in which that he murdered both Maggie and Paul. And as soon as he was done, he texted and called her to show a timestamp of what he was doing. Because he was a lawyer after all. He doesn't appear too intelligent, but he knows how to document things. And that's what I believe he was doing.
That's one of the few things that he documented.
He documented, yeah.
He didn't all the time of anything he did, but when they asked him around what time he sent that text or call, he knew that.
Right. He knew because he did it and he purposely did it. So he goes to his mother's house who has Alzheimer's. He actually speaks with her healthcare provider who is there all the time, Shelley, which comes into play later.
We'll discuss later.
We'll discuss later because
what he says because it's important,
especially during trial.
Yeah.
But either way, he talks to her and her mother, and his mother, and he leaves back, and he starts calling Maggie again around 9:47. No answer. He said he thought it was odd. No big deal. He then calls a bunch of other various people, such as his brother and even Paul's friend, on the way back.
Mm-hmm.
Calling his son's friend sounds very strange. So he went back home. He didn't see Maggie or Paul at the house. So he went to the kennel to see if they were there. So when he arrived at the kennel, he tried to turn Paul over first. And he says, this is the strangest thing, and this is the first thing that I really locked onto. His cell phone popped out of his pocket, and he, quote unquote, tried to do something with it real quick, thinking maybe, and then he put it back down real quick. You get to a scene, your son and your wife is shot.
Double homicide.
A phone is out of his pocket and you care because?
Yeah.
Why would you ever pick it up? Why would you touch the phone before you tried saving your wife? Let's say you knew Paul was gone. It was awful scene. You could tell.
Yeah.
You would move to Maggie first to make sure you could save
phone?
her. Why on earth would you touch a phone? Makes no sense. That's the first key that really, that's it. Something's on that phone
that he doesn't want
the rest
of us to know.
Yeah, he doesn't want anybody to see.
The phone. Secure the phone. They don't need CPR.
Yeah. And then at 10:06, he called the police. During that 911 phone call, he told the dispatcher that he's going to the house. He's going to grab a gun to protect himself. And he went back to Maggie and Paul. So
I find that incredible. That was the first thing that I thought of. Your wife and your son are on the ground by some dog kennels in the middle of the night. I mean, it's dark. There's not like lights everywhere. And you're like, you know what? They're gone. I should protect myself. So I'm going to go get a gun. It makes no sense.
Absolutely no sense.
At this point, I'd be like, I don't care about the gun. And he makes a point to tell dispatch, I'm going to get a gun and I'm going to come back. It didn't feel right. It felt very manufactured.
So in my opinion, I believe that he made it known to the dispatchers, hey, I'm going back to my house and I'm coming back with a firearm. And he did it for two reasons. A timestamp, for one. For two, to show that a reason why he went back to the house. He really went back to hide evidence and to change his clothing. And if any evidence or DNA or blood or anything was found over there, it's because he went back there to find a weapon. He can explain it. I went back to the house. That's the only reason it's there. No, I wasn't hiding. I didn't try to run away. I went there because I had to grab a firearm. And this actually brings me back to when he was talking about target shooting. Even though I think it was in the interview, interrogation number 2, I believe that he mentioned it, that Paul and he both shot for gunshot residue. So that was on his hands, and he explained, hey,
just in case,
this is why I have it.
What happened?
Yes. And the only person who can refute that happens to be his son, who can't refute it.
There's no witnesses.
Right.
There's no.
So there are some key things that I picked up from the interview that really indicated that he stood out, that he was guilty. So
and definitely a suspect.
Yes. And he hit the 4 indicators, all of them. You know,
Definitely the one you mentioned.
He hit all the 4 indicators that I mentioned. You know, he was avoiding questions. He would kind of shy away from a question to answer something else. He gave vague answers about time frames. He talked about a lot of things that did not matter. And then obviously his alibi was him napping. So nobody was there. He was napping. Nobody could account for him. And that's why he started time stamping. He appeared more focused on answering the right questions than the reality of life. A couple of times he broke down, and which is understandably, and I do understand that different people react differently to trauma and situations. But he appeared more concerned with getting the right answers as opposed to the reality of life. And some people can appear that way even if they are innocent, so it's just something that stood out to me. So he stated that he has a bunch of deer cameras, but none were near the kennels, so he knew no camera was going to catch him. He brings up Paul's boat accident multiple times.
I think that's where he begins laying the groundwork for it was someone who had a grudge against him. Because they repeatedly asked him, who do you think might have done this? Is there a reason? And yes, he kind of gives somebody up, like the guy, the maintenance guy that was working there.
We'll go about his story in a second.
Right, we'll get there. But it's really the boating accident. And when they ask him, were there something in particular that stands out? He's like, Not really. Paul really didn't talk about it, but I know that things happened. I know he's been punched and called names.
Right.
So he's kind of pointing them in that direction without giving them anything to go on.
They didn't give anything. Who threatened him? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Was it text? No, it wasn't text. Phone calls? No, it wasn't phone
Yeah,
calls.
there
Nothing
was
documented.
nothing.
It was all in person. Okay, did he say a name or anything? No, his friends might have more information, but he would tell me stories.
So,
I just don't know who would have done it. Which, again, very vague answers. Can't really give you a straightforward answer whatsoever.
Right.
Because that was a big deal. Somebody died. He was being sued for $10 million. And after bringing up the boat incident multiple times, he starts talking about a maintenance worker that he just recently hired. And again, Paul informed him that this gentleman told Paul, a story about him being in high school and that they got into a fight with a black guy and that he was on a special task force to kill Black Panthers. Something completely crazy. And the only person who could say, yeah, that story was told to me was Paul, who couldn't say it happened or not. They can go to the gentleman, but of course he's going to say, oh, that didn't happen. Yeah, I never said any of that.
Don't know.
And believe it or not, if this guy was such a threat, let me go back 1 second here. He did say he wasn't working that day. I don't think it was him. Paul and him got along great. So he just kind of throwing out stuff all over the place.
He liked the guy. It was all right.
Yeah.
He hasn't worked for the field for too long.
He called him an idiot, but he was still employed by Alec even during the next interview. So if he was such a threat, they would have fired him.
That's a good point, yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah, even Alex didn't think that he was a viable threat.
Yeah, and then lastly, he kept talking about firearms. This is a 1,700-acre lot. He was talking about how they don't usually keep firearms at the kennel, but they sometimes frequently are there. I find it hard to believe that with such a big property, you wouldn't have firearms with your hunting dogs, right? That's where your hunting dogs were. Why wouldn't you have a section for firearms to be down there?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. I don't know the South Carolina law. Maybe there's a provision in there or a law stating that you can't. But even so, I bet it would be common practice to do something like that.
Through the entire interview, what I noticed, and it really got me, was how composed and polite the detectives were. Almost as though they were going along with every word he said, like they were agreeing with him. Oh yeah, it makes sense that you'll wake up from a nap. It makes sense that you won't know at no point the time. It makes sense that you will show up, see your wife and son dead, and you'll start messing around with the phone. That's what I would do, And so I'm wondering, and I hope you can answer that for us, is there a point to why detectives approach the way they did Alec Murdaugh? Was it because of his status? Was it because of other reasons? Why were they so kind and polite? And they never really called him out. They kind of really let him answer and go whatever he wanted to go with the answers. They really didn't guide him. They just let them talk and obviously showed support for his loss, which I understand that part. But at some points, I felt like they could have been like, "Really, Alec? You did that?
Right.
You don't remember this?"
Right. So there's actually various reasons why you would take this approach.
Okay.
First and foremost, you don't know if he's actually a victim. At this point, they didn't know. He could have been a victim. The last thing you want to do is call the victim a liar. His wife and son were just murdered, and you're out here calling him a liar. And that's not respectful. The main reason, however, is that you can't force somebody to testify, and you need the information. So if you start being aggressive, calling them out, the only thing he has to do is say, "I need a lawyer," or "I don't want to talk to you," and you can't force him. So they're being extra nice to him because they want information. The more he talks, the more he locks himself into a story. So he says to detectives he was not at the kennels the evening or the night of the incident with Maggie and Paul, right? So he tells detectives that. So if some evidence comes that
Contradicts him,
then
they gotcha.
you're locked in.
Yep.
You said you weren't there.
Now you have to go back and explain.
Right, and you can't really do that. So if they were aggressive at first, said, hey, I don't believe you, and he shut down, they wouldn't have potential key evidence during trial to help put him away for life or however long.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So those are the main reasons in which you want to be nice. And it's actually a very strange thing to do. You have this guy in front of you. You locked him up. This isn't Alec. This is something that I've dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
You've locked him up many a times. Heinous crimes, kidnapping, sometimes suspects in murder, and you actually don't get the full proof. But you know it's a bad person.
Okay.
But you have to be nice to them because they can just shut you down and stop that information from flowing.
And the key to the investigation is to get to the truth.
Of course.
Is to close that case. Is to put the bad guy away.
Right.
And sometimes to do that, you have to work with them. You have to make them trust you.
Build a rapport
like
is the terminology that
hey,
we
it
use.
happened. I get it. Things happen. Accidents happen. Right. As you said, that is a very strange place and to be.
Yes, very strange. You kind of get used to it, but it's definitely weird.
Setting aside the whole interview, the fact that he gave lots of answers, lots of information that was hollow on its axis. What I instantly, when I heard the tape, which was, they're gone, and I turned him over and I touched him, and then put together that with the body cam video of the police officer arriving, and you're looking at Alex and you're like, oh my gosh, he's wearing a cleaner shirt than I am. wait, what about his hands? Because you can see his hands, he's touching, and I was like, something is not.
Yeah, he doesn't have anything on him.
When you realize that, Paul was shot twice, Maggie was shot several times, and he does admit
two different weapons,
2 different rifle and a shotgun, and he does admit that he checked for a pulse. He, used that phone or touched the phone or whatever. There's no way he is so clean. Why is he clean?
Oddly clean, I agree.
I mean, one of the shots were in Paul's head. If you check for pulse, this blood is going to get on you.
Right.
And he says, I immediately checked, I can tell. Nothing. We said that it was muddy that night. Well, aren't you going to kneel, actually get on your knees? Aren't you get any kind of dust or dirt on anything, on your shirt, on your pants?
Yeah, I also thought it was very strange and odd. Almost like what I said, he went back and destroyed the evidence at his house and came back with a new pair of clothing.
So either way, he came in contact with the bodies, yet no blood on him, not even a smudge. Same with his hands, clean. Is that even possible? Join us next week on the Crime Room podcast when we examine the issues with the lack of blood on Alex Murdaugh.
3 days after the murders of his younger son and wife, Alec meets with detectives again to give a second interview, and that second interview changes everything.
Mm-hmm.
For up-to-date crime news, exclusive content, like, subscribe, and comment. We'll give a shout-out on the next show to one of you.
Till the next time.
Till the next time. Hey, you just listened to another amazing episode of The Crime Room. If you want to listen to more episodes, stop by thecrimeroom.com. And if you really like us and our work, you can become a supporter. For only $3 a month, you will receive access to a bonus podcast episode, a monthly members-only newsletter, and for our most dedicated subscribers, Jolene and I will answer a crime-related question submitted by you. Thanks for your support, true crime fans.